Welcome to the Automotive Film and Art Festival's Storytellers Podcast. Today our guest is Harold Osmer. He's an award-winning author and researcher, Southern California historian, and most recently was elected to the board of directors for the West Coast Stock Car Hall of Fame. Today we're going to talk about the Santa Monica road races, events that happened at the turn of the 20th century. Well, Harold, with regards to the Santa Monica road races, what were the circumstances that led to it occurring in Santa Monica?
In Santa Monica itself, well, Santa Monica is a beachfront community today. Back then, it's still close to the beach and all that, but it was just a remote cow town. It had more brothels than it did actual official buildings, let's call it, or people there. And the city officials knew or could foresee that this was going to change. And one way to attract attention, especially in 1909, was to hold an auto race. Auto races have been held in Europe, France, and Great Britain, and even in New York and different places like that. It had never been tried out here. And so they just decided, hey, let's do this. Right. And there were several courses that they tried looking at, several different places. A couple of them in the valley, in San Fernando and Lancashire courses were laid out. And then they just decided Santa Monica would be the better place.
So this was kind of a growth opportunity for the city. This was a situation where they were doing an early marketing program to try and draw some attention to Santa Monica itself.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was kind of this hidden gem on the beach that people didn't even realize was there. So how did that all come about? What other places were they racing at that point in Southern California? Were there other races?
Not too much. Not in 1909, rather. And mind you, the Santa Monica road races operated from 1909 to 1919, and that's a wide range for automotive technology, the development of the city, and all of these kind of things. The first thing you needed for a road race was wide open spaces, and Santa Monica was wide open. To the south, Venice was starting to develop and these kind of things, but they're at sea level. Mm-hmm. Santa Monica is just above. If you think of, you go out to the pier, you got to walk down to get to the pier, and that sort of thing. And so that kept the easy development, if you will, from happening at Santa Monica. So that kept the property open. So when they decided to lay out this for this event, they could do it. And it was the Auto Dealers Association and the real estate developers who approached the city to put this on.
Interesting. And so, there were a few things to do there. There was some kind of pier. There was some kind of operation where they were trying to create a port there, correct? Was that part of what was going on?
Yeah. That was the Long Wharf, and there was the train that ran along what is now San Vicente, and it went down to the coast and just up a little bit to where the Long Wharf showed up. And the steamer ships could pull up right alongside, and the trains would go out and back, and they were hoping that would become the port for Los Angeles. And it was for several years.
So it was industrial. It wasn't like, you go out there and go fishing off this one. So it's
No. This was a real working pier so far as the trains and such go. And you can see in this shot that they literally drove right out there. And if you go out there today along PCH, you see where the lifeguard station is there, and that's essentially the base of the pier.
Interesting. So did they model this race course after anything in particular? Obviously they had to build it. It was all dirt roads. We talked about some of that earlier behind the scenes here. We talked about the fact that it was all dirt roads, and what was the design of the track based on? What was going on there? How did they decide to make this shape that became this?
Well, they had raced in Long Island, cars on Long Island, and a lap there was 23 miles. And the idea was those cars at that time, through gearing, could go 85 to 100 miles an hour, just through gearing. But they didn't have any acceleration. And so you needed the long straightaways in order for these cars just through gearing to get up to speed so you could set a speed record and get world famous and make the headlines and do all that sort of thing. And Santa Monica was an 8.4 mile course, and it was deemed radically short for its day.
Right. So what was an average course at that time?
The average course was over 23 miles.
Wow.
And so Santa Monica, but they just had to put it, kind of fill the space as best they could. And so that's what they did. The starting line was at Ocean in Montana. Mm-hmm. It went downhill to Nevada Avenue, which it was at the time.
which is now
Wilshire.
There you go. Okay.
1913 is when that changed. And then so then they went uphill. And when you're out there next time, notice when you're right by the beach and you're on Wilshire, you're going uphill towards the city, which makes sense because when it rains, the water goes that way towards the. Okay, it's simple enough.
Sure.
But you go uphill to the old soldiers' home, which is now the Veterans Center at San Vicente. Turn left, and you come back down along San Vicente, which curves a little bit. And the reason that curves over there is because the hillside curves along there. The train went along that route.
Okay.
And if you go out there today and you drive along San Vicente, you'll notice there's a big green belt that runs through the middle there. Well, the green belt is where the train used to be.
Interesting.
And the road itself used to be to the south or to your left as you're going towards the ocean. It would be to the left is where the road was.
Interesting.
Later,
wow,
they made the green belt out of the train track area. And you have the one-way traffic going down and coming back, and so it isolates the
which is the case today.
Which is how it is today.
Right.
And that's one of the real fun things about the real road racing is that you can still go out there and drive around this very same course. And you're not going to go as fast as Barney Oldfield, but you can drive along and just imagine because the roads were generally laid out. They were dirt and graded and that sort of thing, but they weren't paved. There was no pavement really to speak of at the time.
Right. Wow. And I understand there was a dramatic difference in speeds between 1909 and 1919. Things really improved. Not very impressive in 1909, but you're really talking, very early modes of transportation. But, I mean, was there a dramatic change? I think you said there was.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. The first races were held just for stock cars, and they were literally stock cars, and they competed in classifications based upon price. It had nothing to do with displacement or wheelbase or any of the technical stuff. It was all just price. Cars costing this much, cars costing that much. And then later, they started out with they came up with a light car race and then a free-for-all. Or you'd have a light car, a heavy car, and a free-for-all.
Wow.
And free-for-all, you could compete in whatever you decided to, run what you brung kind of thing.
Okay. And the size of the engines was dramatically different than it is today. I mean, obviously we're going with smaller, lightweight things these days for better fuel mileage and efficiency. But these were some beastly size engines, were they not? Some of the bigger ones,
bigger
absolutely. Displacement?
Yeah. Some of the big Fiats, I think, had over 900 cubic inches, 4 cylinders, and you'd turn about 12 to 1,300 RPM. And so it was just, and you hear about the proverbial coffee can size pistons. That's exactly what it was.
Ka-chunk kind of thing.
And part of the theory at the time was based off of railroads. You would think, well, bigger, heavier, stronger, brute force, this type of thing. By the middle of the 19-teens, it's a little awkward there, but by the middle of the teens, precision started to come into play. Then Peugeot came out, and what they realized that was smaller, more precise. You could turn more RPM, and you could gain power through RPM as opposed to just sheer brute force. Mm-hmm. And since you're using RPM now, you have a wider range that you can utilize in your car, and that enables you to control your speed a whole lot better.
Interesting.
But all that happened in the same decade, which is just fascinates me and why I'm so thrilled with all of the stuff that went on at the time.
So, I mean, at 80 mile an hour, was that top speed or was that average for the road? Or how fast were they?
1916, 89.9 miles an hour was the official time, 3 hours and 22 minutes. And that was Dario Resta aboard a Peugeot.
And how far did they go?
One up here,
how
300
far?
miles. 300 miles on an 8.5 mile course, 3.5 hours, and they're just driving uphill, back down the hill, and around, just making that loop.
Wow.
And it was brutal.
With pit stops and such, right?
Yep. Oh, absolutely. Right. Yeah, that was the complete time on that. Was 3 hours and 22 minutes.
That's crazy. That's very impressive.
And no power steering, and you had your power steering's all right there, And then you had a riding mechanic. They called him the mechanician at the time.
Mechanician.
And,
okay.
Some of the cars were right-hand drive, some were left-hand drive. It just depended on country of origin on your car.
Interesting.
And because they hadn't really standardized that so far as traffic patterns in the U.S. and anything to say, okay, we're going to be on the left side, right side, that kind of thing yet. But then the mechanician was important because if you broke down anywhere on the course, you had to be able to fix the car. And one of the reasons to hold an auto race in the first place was to demonstrate the reliability of your automobile. And you could well imagine you and I getting in a car, going for a ride and whatever else. If something happens, we can fix it. So that's their thinking. And when they laid out the auto racing rules, when you pull into the pits, it was akin to stopping at the garage. You could have as many people as you wanted to work on it at that point. And so you always had a riding mechanic, and one of his jobs was to help you change tires or address any issues out on the road. And if you ran out of gas or broke a wheel or something on the race course and anyone in the crowd came out to help you, you'd be disqualified.
You're out. Okay. But I think I saw one of the pictures in one of your books that they didn't actually have a jack to lift it up with. They had a big piece of lumber that they would use to leverage, and some guy would stand on his tippy toes, and they'd change the wheel while he's grunting this thing out, right? Basically.
Oh, yeah. You get a guy named Jack.
Perfect. That's where it came from? No?
Who knows? I have no idea. No. But you would get the biggest guy you could just to lever it up so you could be able to change the wheel.
Amazing. And so what happened to Santa Monica? So Santa Monica does its 1909 race. What kind of crowds were they getting? What kind of audience showed up?
They drew all across Los Angeles itself. And, today we think Santa Monica, Los Angeles, kind of the same place, it's all there, but they're 20 miles apart. And back then, it took a while to get there. You think average speed of a horse, just at your basic trot or walk or whatever, probably 3 miles an hour, 4 miles. That's a 5-mile walk to get out there.
Right.
And they had trains. You were able to ride the train out there, and Pacific Electric was able to bring them out. And so it was a distant kind of thing.
It was a dedicated audience, is what you're saying,
right.
Basically.
And what people did was they loaded up and went out there, brought the whole family, and they'd camp out for 2 or 3 days right along the race course. And you could set up, and you could cook out there, and you could do your thing, and you would just, in essence, camp out.
They're just camping.
And it's what people did at that time anyway. And they were happy to get out of the city, which was Los Angeles. And everything went on in Los Angeles at this time, in the very early part of that century. All the business happened there, all the communication happened there, everything else. And Santa Monica was really just a resort town that just happened to be 20 miles away. Mm-hmm. So there was really nothing of, call it commerce or business consequence taking place in Santa Monica. And even though the train rode through there, the train rode through there. It didn't stop and unload and do the trucking thing that we do today. It was none of that. It just went straight through. And so there was nothing going on in Santa Monica. And what they needed, they knew people were coming out. And so Santa Monica needed a way to attract citizens because you can't build roads or have a fire department without a tax base, and you need citizens to do that.
Right.
And people were coming to Southern California. How are you going to attract them?
Right. Well, so what was the population of Santa Monica during this time?
About 3,000.
3,000. Okay.
3,000 to start. Yeah.
Okay. So how many people came out to the race? We were talking about
you're looking
audience coming out from L.A. and everywhere else.
40,000 people.
Wow.
And then later on, they got up to 60 to 80,000. And it's difficult to count all of that because they only sold tickets on Ocean Avenue where the main grandstand was. You could come out and park anywhere along the route. Very similar to going to like the Rose Parade.
Wow.
You can sit in a grandstand and be counted, or you could be one of the 500,000 people along the parade route. And you think, oh, great, I need to be one of the 500,000 people. You could be standing in front of Tony's Taco Stand, one of 500,000 people, and you're still only in the third row, because the sidewalk is only so big. You're spread out over the whole area. All of a sudden, it's not one big, massive crowd. It's just a spread out party kind of an event.
Was automotive racing, obviously we have enthusiasts today. We're both enthusiasts of the automobile racing. But at the time, it was kind of a novelty, was it not? I mean, people hadn't seen cars of this. Well, these are a wide variety of cars as the race evolved, but they were just so amazing, I guess, to see something go that fast.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah, nothing went this fast.
Right.
During practice one time up by the old soldiers' home, one of the old soldiers who had just happened to be standing out there died of a heart attack when the car went by, and it was speculated, or at least reported, that he was so shocked and thrilled by watching a car go by at speed that he just fell over dead.
I bet.
And as you mentioned, they knew about automobiles, people and stuff, but a lot of them didn't have them. They just didn't really exist in great enough numbers for the entire population to have them. And most folks didn't need them. With the city center, downtown L.A., let's call it, people work there. They lived there. They didn't need a horse to travel there. They were already living there. They didn't need a car to do that either. Right. All of that changed with the advent of the automobile, but people would come out to see it because it was the new, great, wonderful thing.
Wow.
And in Venice, it's in this case, you get the Ship's Cafe shown here, and there were things going on there. It was a resort town. It was set up for that.
So it became a party, which was what was behind their purpose, to demonstrate Santa Monica and cause an audience. Who raced at those races? I know we probably wouldn't recognize a lot of the names other than maybe Barney Oldfield, which we've talked about a couple of times on other discussions. But you've got a situation where there were heroes in the racing arena that were building audience just by their name, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Oldfield was famous as he drove Henry Ford's 999 and raced and did that sort of thing. And he barnstormed across the country. He would go to all the fairground tracks and race against other guys, take on all comers, and the whole thing.
Yeah, sure.
And so when he came to town, everybody knew about it. It was like the circus coming to town, or in our case, coming up, the Super Bowl comes to town or something. Everybody knows about it. Whether you go or not, you're aware of it. And our buddy Barney was pretty good at talking his own self up. He didn't win a whole lot of legitimate races, but he was always a good racer. He won Cactus Derby, he won at Venice, and these kind of things. And so his name would draw people out. And he wasn't actually a professional race car driver, let's call it. Guys like Ralph De Palma was a professional race car driver where he set out to make racing his profession. And so he went that direction, and he kind of scoffed at guys like Oldfield, who were more the clown type people, if you will.
Sure.
Someone to be taken serious.
Sure.
He could draw a crowd, which in the end, auto racing is the entertainment industry.
Absolutely.
Really, the nuts and bolts matter to guys like us. But no, you're still trying to put on a show. You want to attract a crowd. That's how you get paid. That's how we do it.
Well, some of the crowd, I understand, didn't follow the rules so well, which is one of the things that there was a challenge for this race, correct? I mean, you had people who felt that it was a participation sport and would either walk across the track or put something in the way, that kind of thing.
There was a little bit of that, and the sheriff actually had an article published in all the local papers. It was a call to common sense for the citizens. It said, hey, behave yourselves. We put these on for you. We want your safety. Please control the people around you, this sort of thing. And the idea was to convince folks to, when a car comes by, watch it go by. Enjoy. Cheer for your guy. Stay the heck out of the way. Well, that was one of the reasons that the courses at Long Island were so rough. You got a 23-mile course. You got a car going around there at, let's just pick an easy number, 100 miles an hour. That means it takes them a long time to come around,
Right.
All of a sudden, now you've got a course that's smaller. Now you got a car that goes by every couple of minutes, and that's just one car out of, 20, 30 that they're running out there. So you got plenty of activity going by. There's none of that real downtime that plagued a bunch of the other courses.
Better show.
Yeah,
better show.
And a better show.
How many cars would run at one time? So you mentioned the classes. We talked about the classes of racing. In total, how many cars would race at one Santa Monica road race?
You'd have between 15 and 25 cars, depending on the event.
Okay.
And
or the class?
Right.
Okay.
And they always ran as a staggered start. So they went against the clock.
Okay.
And that was partly because they just wanted to break up the cars. They knew or anticipated that it wasn't a good idea to send everybody into the first turn all together in one shot.
If you watch Formula One this year, you can understand why.
Yeah. Some lessons are better learned than others.
So
you can see these guys are lining up. Yep. This would be 1914, and they still got to crank start the cars.
Sure.
And the pits were right alongside, and there's a Pacific Electric car out there, and it's right alongside Ocean Avenue.
And move the folks around.
And the starting line was at Ocean in Montana, and so that's where the big scoreboard was built.
Right.
And
you mentioned Dead Man's Curve, before the whole deal with Jan and Dean and the situation with Sunset Boulevard. There was a Dead Man's Curve in this race.
Yep, absolutely. Well, we still need to sell newspapers.
Yeah.
And, come out and watch cars go in circles isn't a good way to sell newspapers. A better way to say, hey, come on out and watch Dead Man's Curve. These guys are risking their neck. And this was 1909, and they dubbed the turn at Nevada and Ocean as Dead Man's Curve.
Which I've been through many times.
And nobody died in a racing incident at Dead Man's Curve.
So no death?
No, not there.
Mislabeled?
Yep, absolutely mislabeled. Although the first injury occurred there when a guy was practicing. He got a little bit wide of the curve, hit a palm tree. A guy that was watching up in the palm tree fell out, broke his arm. And so there's your first racing-related injury.
Yeah, it's kind of an on-track injury, but not. So it is more of a Gardner injury. So,
sure.
But anyway, so was this successful in drawing interest in Santa Monica?
It's difficult to point to it and say this is what made it happen. But there's no doubt that the attention that was garnered, through pictures like this, for instance, Eddie pulling at Dead Man's Curve. You see guys scrambling for their lives over on the other side, literally.
Wow.
Pictures like this.
No guardrails, of course.
Oh, of course not. Why bother with that?
That's it.
But they would get national attention, especially if they were setting speed records, and speed records was a big thing. The new world speed record, whatever. And so you'd get national attention all across the Midwest. And there was a couple of things that happened from that. Typically, they ran these races early in the year and late in the year. And it's snow and mud and gross everywhere else because it's still a lot of dirt roads. Well, these guys are racing on dirt roads. But look, it's dry.
Right.
What the heck? Wait a minute. Now you're promoting the climate again, which is one of the major draws of Southern California in the first place.
Yep.
And so people would see that, and you'd get these national headlines, and that's what really helped draw people here. And if you look at a population chart, you'll notice that the population of Santa Monica doubles every couple of years, or every couple of decades, rather, for several decades. And eventually, there you go. So we went from 3,000 to 78 real quick there. And
there you go.
Eventually,
it looks like it worked there.
Yeah. Eventually, it reached an equilibrium. But there are about 85 to 90,000 people live there now, and that's about how many are going to fit with the given density that they have at this time.
They're pretty packed. The last time I was in Santa Monica.
Yeah.
So simply, why did it cease? One thing I wanted to mention, just for perspective on this deal, is Indianapolis started in 1911, correct?
Yeah.
So you've got a race that actually predates it by two years,
right? Which
is that alone sets some perspective on what's going on here. So why did it cease to be in 1919? What happened?
It was successful.
Yeah.
And they kept drawing bigger crowds. Development alongside the ocean or along Ocean Avenue got more significant, and the races, in order to be held, you had to shut down the city to do it. And they were no longer willing to tolerate that.
I see.
That and the cars got faster. It's one thing for us to bring the family out and sit and watch cars drive by at 60 miles an hour. It's a whole other thing to watch them drive by at 100 miles an hour. And in 1916, tragedy actually happened. Going along the S curve at along San Vicente at 7th, Lewis Jackson got out of control, coming down the way.
Yeah.
He broke a wheel.
Yeah.
Got out of control, hit the tree, tipped over, killed a lemonade stand lady, killed a movie camera guy. Radiator went flying, parts like this. He killed himself as well. And you say, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. And people started to learn. Keep in mind that automobile racing as a sport was still being formed. It was still developing. They hadn't even decided to use a checkered flag as a standard bearer for the end of the race and until 1913. And so they didn't really know what they had on their hands. They used the roads because that was the easiest place to do it. You could lay out a course pretty quick and easy and do that sort of thing with it. But the sport of auto racing hadn't really developed to the point to where you could control the crowds, control the rules, control ticket taking.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they didn't know.
Sure.
They had nothing to base it off of. And so it developed from that. And that's part of what was fun about Los Angeles and Southern California is that the auto racing game developed and grew at the same time as the automobile, obviously, and the same time as Los Angeles itself. So as the city grew, as the sport grew, as the automobile was around, that was all part of it. They all did it together.
Yeah, makes sense.
And it tied into, moving from the city center. The automobile all of a sudden gave you the opportunity to live, 8 miles away, and now you can drive in and out. All of a sudden you can move and shop and do things in different places. And that's a little bit different discussion, but it is still tied to this very time.
And it also tied into the movie business at that time. I think there were other folks, like I think you mentioned that Max Sennett did some, we got into some, what was his film that he did?
The fun one I like is from 1913, and it's Speed Kings.
Speed Kings.
And they shot this at Santa Monica during the road races, and it was Mabel Normand. And the gist of the story is, my daughter needs to get married, and so whoever wins the race gets to marry my daughter.
Good storyline.
Yeah.
There you go.
Typical vaudevillian type of thing that went on there. And so they shot it at the races, and it was good fun. And
nice.
They actually loaded imagine the cameras of the day. They put it on a truck and moved along and filmed cars going up and down the road and doing their thing, as well as actual race footage and the whole bit. And then it was good fun, good silent movie kind of fun. You can find it online and just check it out. You got to laugh.
I bet. I bet. But celebrities also would come out for the race too, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. Anybody who was anybody wanted to be out there. And the thing was that the movie industry was very new as well. I mean, I mentioned Mabel Normand in Speed Kings, and a lot of people will look and say, well, who's Mabel Normand? Wait a minute. And she's the one that preceded Mary Pickford. I said, well, wait a minute. Mary Pickford was a silent film star. You mean there was somebody before? Yeah. Somebody always paved the way. And they rarely get the credit that they deserve. Somebody has to show the way and let everybody else know that it's possible for them to be able to exploit it for their own lives and their own way. And it's great.
Right.
And in this case, in the movie industry, actress world, it was Mabel Normand. And that was here at Santa Monica.
She looks quite content there. She looks pretty happy
great.
there. She's having a good time.
She's out there with a local guy, Teddy Tetzlaff. And
you made that up. You had to make that up.
No. They named him Terrible Teddy Tetzlaff when he raced those cars because he would just go all out, and he would either break or win, that kind of thing.
All or nothing.
All or nothing.
All or nothing.
Yep. And there's Tetzlaff in the Louisier. He won in 1912, won the road race.
Wow.
And he was a local guy, and I think it was his grandson became a movie producer. So it's all tied together. It all worked.
Right.
But
nice.
You can't separate any of this from Southern California history, though. Partly because it took place here, and partly because as people came to Southern California, the things that the institutions that we had developed had to change to adapt to that. And there was so much change in the population over the time that a lot of the new guys had no respect, let's call it, for what came before them. Mm-hmm. And part of what drew people to Southern California was the air of excitement. You could do anything here. You weren't stuck in the old vertical cities of Chicago and, New York and those places where you were stuck with all the rules, the long-established rules. And some of them worthwhile, but you came out here, you were free to set your own way.
Right.
And the automobile was one way of doing it. The auto racing, of course, was exciting and exemplified that spirit, as did the movie industry. It was something new you could do, and you didn't have to follow the union rules and, use their studios. And a lot of the early movies that were kind of slapstick stuff, and we've seen those old movies where they've got the cars racing down the road and they tied the girl to the railroad tracks and all that. It was all shot out here. And the reason they could do it was because you get the sun and a clear day, and we don't have to schedule this stuff.
Yeah, pretty much any time during the year.
And the bathing beauties and all of that.
And Los Angeles was developed basically over the car as well, because we were driving everywhere and we had roads everywhere and our mass transit, which is another topic that we can get into. But, we all like the individuality of our cars and we can drive wherever we need to. So, Harold, with the excitement that's going on in Santa Monica today, for the background here, is it's its own city. It's not part of Los Angeles. It's separate from Ocean Park, Venice, all these other cities. It has its own entity. What happened in Venice? They had a big road race series that they did as well. How did the Santa Monica road races affect the ones that are going on in Venice and the separation of Santa Monica from the city?
Well, Venice and Ocean Park are just to the south of Santa Monica, and it's easy to kind of conflate the three. But if you're coming north, it'll be Venice, Ocean Park, and then Santa Monica. And that's what just kind of sets the geography. Now, Ocean Park and Venice are at sea level, and so that's part of why Abbot Kinney was able to create the canals and do that sort of thing. They also had
Abbot Kinney was the founder of Venice, correct?
Of Venice, right.
And there is a section of Los Angeles called Abbot Kinney, which is a cute little community and shopping. My wife loves it. But anyway, so Abbot Kinney developed Venice with the model of Venice, Italy.
Correct.
Okay.
And so people flocked out there for the resort idea. Again, you're coming from Los Angeles. You want to come down and stay at the beach where it's cooler. They went in the water. You wouldn't call it swimming. Most people couldn't swim back then. They just didn't know how. Plus, you had those wool swimsuits, so that was difficult. And that set Santa Monica apart because they developed later. If you think in terms of building, Venice, Ocean Park developed from 1900, let's call it the 1920, give or take, and Santa Monica was still mostly rural. And by the time Santa Monica developed, after the road races came about, they have now modern building. It's not old and run down like the rest of like Venice was and that sort of thing. And so that was part of what happened there. The road races were good for attracting people to Santa Monica, and once they built up enough population and had their tax base set, they were able to stave off the annexation to Los Angeles, which Los Angeles was annex crazy back in the day. Now, one of the main reasons that they were able to stay apart from Los Angeles was that they had their own water. There's an aquifer under Santa Monica, which they still draw from. It provides about 82% of city needs. Now, everywhere else, if you didn't want to be part of Los Angeles, they'd say, well, that's great. You keep your Cam town right over there, buddy. Yeah, nice for you. We'll sell you all the water you want. And you soon realize we can't survive. And so you would allow Cam town to get annexed into Los Angeles.
Right.
That's part of what happened with Venice. Ocean Park, which was between the two, kind of got divided into, part of it went to Venice, part of it went to Santa Monica. Venice got sucked into Los Angeles, and Los Angeles, of course, said, well, become part of us. We'll take care of your canals. We'll do this. We'll do that. And they didn't do any of it. Imagine that, a politician telling a story and not following through on it.
Imagine that.
And part of the thing that it was when they were annexed into Los Angeles in the 1920s was you're still a remote area. All that business, community, everything that's going on that we spoke of earlier, that's all taking place in downtown Los Angeles. You're out there as a satellite neighborhood.
Right.
We don't care. In terms of the road racing, they did run a road race.
What years did the Venice road race go?
1915 they ran.
Okay.
And it was, the major event was a big one-off event, and it was St. Patrick's Day.
Was it a one-off?
It was a one-off.
One year.
Okay.
And all right.
The reason they did that was they were running at Santa Monica. They ran 1913, 1914, and 1916. They skipped 15.
Huh.
And what happened was the Eastern powers that be decided to run the Grand Prize and Vanderbilt Cup race in San Francisco in 1915. And so they took the race away from Santa Monica, moved it up to San Francisco because the Pan-Pacific Exposition was going on up there. And
so Venice took the opportunity to run their race.
Yeah, you guys want to have a race, we'll do it.
Right.
And they held a race, and it was a wonderful event. It was sparklingly successful, and it was a great time. And I'm still shaking my head at it. I wasn't there, but I just love the story that they took this up to San Francisco, and they're going to run right out there on the Embarcadero and the whole bit. And they had all the top race car drivers. Sure, they're going to have the big race, and it rained the whole time. And most of the cars, the competitors, just pulled off the track.
Wow.
They drove around a little bit, and they realized this is dangerous. This is dumb.
What time of year did they do that?
This was in February.
It was in February. Okay,
Yeah.
well,
And they just
it could
said,
rain. It could rain.
Yeah.
It's a rare thing, but
it did up
could
there.
rain.
And it was the weather
Yeah.
down here that same day, sparkling.
Absolutely.
Absolutely sparkling.
Always the way that works.
Yeah.
But so that was how Santa Monica was able to stay separate. Just all those the tax base and the aquifer. That's fascinating.
And you need all those. We always say, why did they do that? Well, you're looking at one item. It's never one item. There's always multiple pieces that come into play, and you're not always aware of them. And they're not always complicated. A lot of times it's just pretty straightforward.
Right.
You don't have enough people, so you can't charge enough tax to support a town. And why do you need taxes to support a town? Well, because you need a fire department. Okay, you need electricity. Okay, you need good roads. Okay, you got to pay the sheriff. Well, okay. And you need enough people around to be able to do that. And to attract people, you need to advertise. And the way they advertise, think about, if I say, let's go to Paris, you can't help it. First thing pops in your mind is Eiffel Tower. Why? Advertising.
Right.
We've seen, even if it's not an outright poster for it, we've seen it on TV. We've heard about it. People want to go to places they've heard of. And when they show the auto racing that took place in Santa Monica, again, you got James and Martha sitting there in Chicago looking at a newspaper, and there's a picture. They look out their window, and they got 3 feet of snow, and she says, you know what? We're moving.
Right. You hear the suitcases closing in Iowa, right? So there you go.
Absolutely.
But obviously it was a huge benefit for Santa Monica. The marketing that it provided for the city was just awesome. So amazing.
It's great. And you can drive that road today still, which is another part that I love it. And I drive along that road, and I know nobody around me knows this.
Do you get up to 100?
Oh, no, I didn't get to do that.
But this has been fascinating. I got to tell you, there's some amazing things here. Your book about the Santa Monica road races, just fabulous. The photos and the storyline.
Thank you.
And all the great anecdotes that come out of that. And the one thing that I remember you mentioned, there's in Indianapolis at the end of the race, they always drink a bottle of milk. And I had no idea where this came from. So explain what was happening here. One of the racers requested milk,
right?
And why it was pretty fascinating.
At Indianapolis, it's a Midwestern milk producers. We need a sponsor. They sponsor. Okay, you take a swig of milk, that kind of thing. And that showed up in the late 1930s. Well, in 1916, Dario Resta won the American Grand Prize race, and after winning the race, before getting out of his car, he requested a bottle of milk. And the LA Times says, and he drank the same to the dregs before dismounting. So before he even got out of the car, he drank it. And that was 1916. And it's just a great little bit of history that happened here first, that kind of thing.
Maybe it came from that. Who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows?
Another quick little aspect of the racing in Santa Monica, why would the city themselves allow this to happen, is that the Auto Dealers Association and the real estate guys who put this on, they agreed to grade the roads when they came out here. They said, well, look, this is a race course. We'll grade these things. And so they dragged the big graders over to smooth them out, get rid of the ruts and that sort of thing. They'll press them down, and they oiled the roads. And the reason they did this was so that the cars could go faster, so you could set more world speed records and do that sort of thing. After the races, they came back out, they regraded the roads and oiled them again at their expense. What this allowed the city to do then was the races are over. We not only got the promotion, but now we have, it's not really a paved road, but it was an oiled road. And it was wide and it was flat. And that's Wilshire Boulevard. and San Vicente and these sorts of things. And those kind of things take money. The infrastructure take money for a city to do. And if you don't have any residents, you can't do that. So these guys, the guys that put on the auto races, took care of that for Santa Monica. And that allowed them to attract people because, okay, we're going to move out there. We're going to set up our business. Let's do it on the non-dusty road. Let's do it alongside of Wilshire Boulevard.
Right.
And we can do this. And so part of that was already there. And that's one way that the city of Santa Monica absolutely benefited by having these auto races take place there.
Yeah. What a nice additional benefit for them on many different levels. But this has been fascinating. I really enjoyed getting the background on this, and thank you for your time, Harold. This concludes this episode of Automotive Film and Art Festival Storytellers Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and will join us again soon.